economy does not adequately achieve the goals of full employment, stability, and economic growth. Inflation is defined as an increase in the aggregate or average price level of goods and services in the economy that is persistent and sustained. While an unemployment occurs when people of working age are able and eager to work but are unable to find suitable employment. Unemployment is the number of people in the labor force who want to work but are unable to find work. It has been 2 years since the COVID-19 pandemic penetrated the deepest core of the human civilization and made us realize the power of Mother Nature. The outbreak of the coronavirus COVID-19 that has begun in December 2019 drastically affected the whole world, such as the economy, retail sector, tourism industry, education, and so on. The COVID-19 pandemic in India has disrupted the global economy, and India is no different. The economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in India has been largely destructive. India's growth in the fourth quarter of the fiscal year 2020 went down to 3.1% according to the Ministry of Statistics. On May 31st, the Indian government released the data for GDP that during the financial year 2020 to 2021, GDP contracted by 7.3%. It is the most severe contraction from the time India got its independence. The reasons behind this trajectory are obvious: lockdown leading to the closing of business units, increasing unemployment rate, and a significant decline in domestic consumption. The coronavirus pandemic also impacts exports and imports. India's exports in April 2020 fell by 36.65% year-on-year, while imports in April 2020 fell by 47.36% as compared to April 2019. This results its effect on Indian economy. The coronavirus pandemic also impact on tourism sector. Due to COVID-19, movements of people were restricted, and hence tourism industry is facing huge losses. Tourists spend money in the countries they visit, so the loss of this money is affecting the economies of many countries. Overall, the economic contractions of this corona period is challenging for the whole world. In such a situation, we all have to work together so that we can get out of the economic situation and move towards positive growth again.
According to an expansion by Worldometer of the most recent statistic provided by the United Nations, the current population of India is 1,407,236,169 as of Thursday, July 7, 2022. Considering that only just 2 babies per woman in 2021, the fertility rate will be drawn significantly from the 5.9 births per woman in 1950, which is good news for our nation's population. However, this does not mean that the population will begin to decline rapidly. For many years to come, we can expect to see no increase in our potential growth rate. The country's goal of stability has been achieved thus far. India is expected to have 1.4 billion population by 2020, making it the world's second most populous country after China. Moreover, the country owes $570 billion in foreign debt. As one of the end of March 2020, it has achieved a new high of 11.6 billion USD. At the end of March 2021, the external debt to GDP ratio was higher at 21.1% than 20.6% 1 year previously. Furthermore, India's most significant industry is the service industry. In other words, the service sector contributes 53.89% of the total value. 60.38% of the economy consists of the agriculture and allied sector. 29.34% of the economy consists of the industrial sector, and 54.26% of the economy consists of the service sector. The respective share of the primary, which include agriculture, forestry, fishing and mining; secondary, which include manufacturing, electricity, gas, water supply and other utility service; and tertiary, which include services. Sector have been estimated to be 21.82%, 24.29% and 53.89% respectively.
Gross domestic product of India experienced a precipitous decline of 24.4% between April and June in the year 2020. The most recent estimates of national income suggest that during the second quarter of the 2021 fiscal year, the GDP shrank by an additional of 7.4%. GDP increased by only 0.5% in the third quarter ending October 2020 and by 1.6% in the fourth quarter ending March 2021, indicating that the recovery is still in its early stages. This indicates that the overall rate of contraction in India was, in terms of real percentage, 7.3% of the entirety of the fiscal year 2020 to 2021. There have only been 4 years since India's independence that the country's national income has decreased. These years were 1958, 1966, 1973 and 1980. The reduction in 1980 was the most significant of the four, which is 5.2%. This indicates that the year 2020 to 2021 will be the worst year in terms of economic decline in the history of the country, and it will be significantly worse than the total contraction that will occur around the world. The drop is completely responsible for reversing the trend in global inequality, which had been decreasing but has now started to increase again after 3 decades of falling. The trend had been falling but has now started to rise after 3 decades. The US economy has seen one of the steepest declines among the many that have been heavily damaged. The global GDP fell by 3.3% in 2022/21, while the declines in emerging market and developing nations were 3.3% and 2.2% respectively. A comparison of India's macroeconomic statistics with those of a reference group of comparable nations and the global economy can be seen in Table 1. Because India's growth rate was among the greatest in 2019, COVID-19's impact is more visible. It is clear that India's 2020 unemployment rate of 7.1% is lower than the global average, as well as lower than other countries with similar per capita incomes. Unemployment was lower in the economies of the reference group because of more favorable labor market policies aimed at preserving jobs for the unemployed. Despite the magnitude of the pandemic, India has allocated comparatively little additional budgetary resources to different social safety measures. Although the country's non-health sector measures appear to be comparable to the reference group, the additional health sector budgetary measures are less than half those in the reference group. According to the statistic provided by the government, the annual rate of inflation in India reached its highest point since October of 2020 in March 2022, when it reached 6.95%. In a similar vein, the wholesale price index for March came in at 14.5%, making it the second highest reading since 2012. As a result of sharp increase in the price of crude oil, the price of crude petroleum had risen to 83.56% in March from 55.70% during the month of February. And other commodities around the world, the economy of India is currently facing a dual obstacle. This is because the current spike in inflation is the result of the steep rise in price of crude oil. As a result, the prices of several of the necessary commodities that are imported have gone up. In addition, as a direct result of the war between Russia and Ukraine, there has been a breakdown in the global supply chain. Notable is the fact that 85% of India's oil requirements are met by imports. In light of the recent slowdown in economic activity around the world, the central bank has decided to increase interest rates in order to better regulate to keep an eye on the flow of money into the banking system.
It is almost impossible for inflation rate to be zero. There will always be inflation, but it is controllable. There are also a few methods on how to control inflation rate so that it will not be harmful to a country. The methods are contractionary fiscal policy, contractionary monetary policy, and direct control. Contractionary fiscal policy is a measure where the government reduces the inflationary pressure on its economy by implementing a budget surplus. Budget surplus can be implemented by two methods, which are reducing government expenditure or increasing taxation to decrease the aggregate demand. This is because when any element of aggregate demand decreases, the aggregate demand will also be decreased. Next, contractionary monetary policy. In this measure, central bank of a country will reduce the money supply through different monetary instruments. Each of these measures will reduce the money creation, consumption, and investment so that the aggregate demand will fall, thus causing decreasing in prices. Each of these measures will reduce the money creation, consumption, and investment so that the aggregate demand will fall, causing decreasing in prices. Lastly, direct control. Direct control is a method to be used when inflation is due to an increase in the cost of production. This direct control method can be used to control the cost push inflation. There are 5 direct control measures that are common in fighting inflation. Starting with an income policy, exchange rate policies to control import cost push inflation, supply side policies to increase productivity, price control and rationing, and lastly, increase in savings. In conclusion, due to the inflation and unemployment because of the COVID-19 in India, the government should take a major decision on how to overcome it. The government needed to plan and structure their next step to avoid the inflation rate for becoming uncontrollable. Of course, to solve the unemployment rate is by opening more job opportunities, but at the same time, they need to avoid the inflation rate from increasing. In our point of view, the first things that the government of India should do as soon as the COVID-19 declared as endemic is start opening more production sector in the country. This will help to decrease the unemployment rate while also increasing productivity. When they have a more productive workforce, it will produce more goods and services. Greater supply obviously will reduce the pressure of the price downward, thus reducing the inflation rate. India have a large populations, so they can produce more. It is up to the government to think on how to solve this problem for the greater good.